Welcome to the Badges and Banter podcast, your number one source for insights, discussions, and debates in the public safety industry, with your hosts, Jeff Halstead and Ken Kemna.
Hey, welcome to another series of Badges and Banters. My name's Jeff Halstead, and with me is my dear friend, retired Fire Chief Ken Kemna. Welcome, Ken.
Morning, Chief. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and we I'm telling you, I'm excited about this guest, and for a couple of reasons. One, huge supporter of our military and public safety. Two, fascinating career as a tour manager. But what really intrigued me was we had been friends for a long time, and we've been talking, and then when he told me after the worst mass shooting in U.S. history that he was literally there and was in harm's way for a long period of time. And then that revolutionized the music industry and the way they manage concerts and security. But with us is Jake LaGrone. Good morning to you, sir.
Hey, Jeff and Ken. Can I call you both Chief?
You can call us anything you want. You're our guest, so you get to run the show.
That's right. You're in charge. Great to meet you, Ken, and appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, thank you. And then for our viewers, if you don't mind giving us a quick little biography, who you are, how you got into your career, and then we'll start delving into, the catastrophic event that you experienced.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I've been in Nashville since 1989. I originally thought my cousin had a dream to be a singer and an artist, and grew up in West Texas out in the Amarillo area. And he had a band or was in a band and played all the time. So, back in the old days, you can be a star before The Voice and, all the shows that are out now was on the Nashville network. And anyway, he came out and tried and to go down that path, and ultimately, went back home a couple years or a year or so later, and I stayed and I've been blessed. I've had ironically, for those of your listeners that remember Keith Whitley, a friend of a friend knew Keith Whitley's bus driver, and Keith, and I remember these dates because it affected the path of my life. I was had come to Nashville for a little while, was working as a security guard at a U.S. Tobacco, and a guy got stabbed one night. And I called my dad back in Texas. I said, you know what, I'm going to go back. I'm going to get that college degree that you told me to, and then I'll go back to Nashville. And long story short, I did not go back to college. But I was home. I came home in April of 89. Well, Keith died May 9th of 89. And I remember I just loaded a horse in the trailer. I'd been up helping a guy move some cattle that day, and AM radio, Keith Whitley dead. I can't remember how old he was, but he was young.
Yeah.
And so fast forward in August, I'm working in a big Western store in Amarillo and had enrolled in college, and I got paged to the phone, and I answered the phone, and only 2 or 3 people knew there were no cell phones back then. And this bus driver is Keith Whitley's bus driver. And he said, hey, I'm going to be in Lori's in Amarillo tomorrow playing the Cattle Barons ball. And hey, would you mind picking her up and taking her to a tanning bed? Sure, you'd be glad to. And
you're talking about Lori Morgan.
Lori Morgan, yeah, sure am. And so I had my wife, girlfriend then, a wife of 35 or 7 years or whatever you say, honey, if you listen to this, long time, was with me. And 91, we got married. So I do know that part. But anyway, we take her to the tanning bed and go by this Western store, and all the guys are just, Lori's a beautiful woman and was on their first or second single. And that afternoon, she asked if I could fly to Nashville and meet with her manager the next day. And I remember, this true story. I went home, I went to the show that night, went home. Well, I had 3 roommates and the hat creaser at the Western store and a couple of boot guys, salesmen. And I woke them up and I was like, man, I got to have, $1,000 or something to fly to Nashville. Back then you could pay cash, and everybody pulled their money together. I think we had $300, and a lady next door had just gone through a divorce. We thought she was old. She was 32 or something. And she came over, she had just gone through a divorce, and she counted out like $2,500. So I literally flew to Nashville the next day and met with a guy named Jack McFadden, who managed Buck Owens and Merle Haggard. And I'll never forget it. He looked at me and said, "Son, you got any idea what you're getting into?" I said, "Oh, yes, sir. My aunt's got a bar back home, and we have a fish fry on Friday night and a live band on Saturday night." And you talk about green, but we were out. Lori was touring with Kenny Rogers at that time, and Kenny's tour manager's been a friend since then and lifelong. Ended up mentoring me, and then George Strait's tour manager, who just recently passed away, unfortunately. Both really took me under their wing, and I learned a lot from those guys. So
That's awesome.
So I'm really, I mean, obviously we're going to talk about what took place in Vegas. I'm curious how the industry aside from that event, how has the industry changed over the time that you have been tour managing? How has the industry changed, evolved?
yeah, I would say day and night. When I came to town, they still had cassettes, and CDs were happening. But you could still buy a cassette in those days. So that's one piece. Just revenue for artists. A lot of people realize it now because of social media. But the real revenue for artists and their careers is touring. I mean, you got to be able to sell sell tickets. We call it hard tickets to be a headliner. So when you're seeing an artist, like a Jason Aldean or someone selling out 15, 20,000 seats, I mean, you got to be a headliner. But so I think the digital revolution really affected everything, which has had
Interesting.
both good and bad results. I mean, it's really affected songwriters and the revenue you could make back in those days from writing a big hit, because they had a way to track all that. And now it's decreased. So creativity is challenged on many fronts. I'm sure it affects y'all's world, artificial intelligence. I mean, there's so many things, but I would say that's probably the biggest change that I've seen. And then, none of us used to think about security. I think the rock world was way ahead of us as far as Nashville is concerned. But that's probably the single biggest change that I've seen, just what social media and digital distribution has done to the industry.
Yeah, I think as a layperson, I mean, I certainly would fall into this category. No clue how revenue is generated in the music industry. I think
Right.
we think of every time you hear it played on the radio that somebody's getting a check somewhere and that it's the artist and
Yeah.
that's how they make their money. But apparently that's not in fact the case. Really interested though, because you mentioned that obviously rock music was a little bit ahead of the game from a security perspective. I would imagine that has to do with sort
Yeah.
of the makeup of the listening audience and kind of
Yeah.
what the events were like?
Yeah, I think so for sure. Back in those days, there were outlaws in country music. I mean, I've heard, fortunately have known, was fortunate to know Waylon and got to hear a lot of those stories about, tearing up hotel rooms and stuff. But that was more in the rock world, I think, than it was in the country world. You just didn't think about an active shooter, until the last, 15 years or so, or, I don't know exactly, but as it's, as things have evolved, it certainly became an issue. But the rock world carried security guys. Kenny Rogers in '89, because he was more of a pop star. He had crossed over. He had a security guy, and I just remember he was a retired DEA agent, and he'd got thrown out of had a broken back, so he was every day. He'd be stretching, trying to get where I'm like, if you do have a problem, somebody else is going to have to be in the fight. But was a good guy, and it was interesting that Kenny so that's kind of my first exposure to it. But until actually until I was with Rascal Flats later on, we didn't have security, which I wore as the tour manager, wore a lot of hats, and we interfaced with local law enforcement, local venue security, and so on.
Yeah, and when we talked, I remember we were catching up. I was telling you about, the business we started, and then you were telling me about some of the transitions you made. But when you explained about the Vegas incident, I had no idea of the dangers y'all were involved in on stage,
Yeah.
backstage, and even in your bus. So if you don't mind giving the viewers an oversight, because you were
Sure.
at point zero where it
I
happened.
was. Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. I do have a real heart for law enforcement and military. men and women across the country. It's funny, I look at my phone and I know law enforcement in almost every major city in America from 35 years of touring. But the thing that stands out, we were on a 3-week West Coast run with Aldean. So we rolled in, we'd been, I think we were in Oakland, California the night before, rolled in, and it's Groundhog Day for me. I mean, it's the same thing in that we were coming out of a amphitheater show into a festival, which is not all that common. But so I had 76 people there. We didn't need that many, but it didn't make sense to fly them home. And my wife and son had been in Dallas the night before, and my wife flew out to Vegas and checked into Mandalay Bay about 1 o'clock. And, she called and I said, hey, just come down at catering. So for us, we feed everybody 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I said, just come down at dinner. And that's a Live Nation, MGM entertainment event, big event. Felt good about it. I look up and I know this because I went through multiple interviews. There were north of 50 officers backstage, in uniform. I actually know a couple of those guys, and you're not thinking about at that moment. I certainly wasn't thinking about somebody stalking us from 32 floors up. And fast forward, my wife comes in. She had a friend from her high school years. She flew out, first concert they'd ever been to. Well, I'm tired. I'm like, I've been we're already 3 weeks in, and I told my wife, I said, when the show starts, meet me in production, which is, we typically have a mobile office set up, as you came to before. So she comes in, I'm probably the fourth or fifth song. I'm zipping up my backpack, and I'm like, I heard the first shots. And I grew up in West Texas. I hunted coyotes. I know what a 308 sounds like. I knew immediately we were in big trouble. And the first shots were down Las Vegas Boulevard to the fuel tank. I think the shooter thought that it would blow up the fuel tanks. And I wear in-ears like the musicians do. You see them in their ears. Well, I'm listening to the radio, and my radio immediately lit up, and my stage manager was like, hey, do we have fireworks? And my wife's texting her friend, and she goes, sounds like fireworks. And I'm like, I just picked up my radio and I said, hey, no, it's not fireworks. We got a problem. Well, my first thought was, okay, I got to get my wife to the bus. I'm going to put her in the middle of the bus, which the bunks, and Jeff, you've been on buses. In our buses, the bunks are kind of in the middle of the buses, and they're on both sides. So I thought, I'm going to throw her in the middle, throw a mattress on her, and then I'll go get Jason. Well, when I came out, I came out the door and was kind of going upstream, and you'll be able to see on this photo. But basically, people are running. He's letting it rip, and in my mind, it's the echo. He's changed windows. There's 2 windows knocked out, and every time he changed, so it sounds like it's coming from everywhere. And I remember reaching back for my wife. I didn't turn around because I was trying to keep her right behind me, and she had stopped probably 10 feet behind me, frozen in fear. And somebody 10 feet away, got shot, and she blocked it. I think your mind does crazy things in that environment. I think it blocked out. I ran back and got her. So you got to stay with me. And I get to the door of the bus, half the time I can't remember the code. I punched it in, got on. And this is where, God really had his hand on me that night. I took one step. I pushed my wife up. I locked the door. I took one step. Well, our bus was literally sitting next to the stage, and Jason's bus was kind of crossways in front of us. And I thought, man, the band's going to be coming, So I turned and unlocked that door, and then I took one step, and the first bullet went right. It missed me that far. It's literally an inch. And I took I took my hat off and stripped the glass off, and I felt like I was bleeding. Because glass was, all over me, and I'm like, and at that moment, I remember I've got FBI friends here and some guys I'd go shoot with at the range from time to time. And they would be like, LaGrone, we're never going to make you a great shot, but I'm like, I just don't want to shoot an innocent kid if I'm carrying somewhere that, and he said, we can help you be safe and have reasonably good form. We can't prepare you for the adrenaline dump. And man, did I learn what that meant. That night everything kind of became tunnel vision. And then what happened, I know, it took months and several meetings with FBI and investigators. we all believe when I opened the door, he saw the light, just like in your car. Opened that door, and then he just shot my bus 7 times right down. He missed it high once, but a bullet missed my wife about 2 inches. And that one is when she was screaming, as you know, as she should have been, but laying in the floor. But when that bullet came through the side of the bus, it went through right under the couch, and the cushion just exploded in the bus. And that she knew right then. I mean, so in my mind, the shooter's right outside the door, and it pauses for a second, and the door of my bus opens. And you know, any other time I've got a gun on the bus, but I didn't. We'd been in Canada. And I don't want to go to jail in Canada. So, uh, but I opened the door, and I reached to grab for my radio, and I was going to hit whoever it was with that. And it was our merch guy. And then Cody, he came up on the bus. I said, get down by Susan, my wife. And then it's crazy. I've got it on a timeline on my phone. That was 10:04, 10:07. Off the top of my head, I don't remember, but I could hear my ears. I dropped them down on my shoulders. My ears were squawking, and I pulled them up and put them in. And our sound guy, our front of house guy, was begging for help. They were taking fire. And I looked at Cody and I said, hey, man, whatever you do not leave my wife. So I came off the bus, and I came around to the front, and I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but I was going to go help Chris. And but it's pandemonium everywhere. I mean, he's shooting, and you guys probably remember. I mean, he had bump stocks. I mean, it sounded like AK-47s up there, and I mean, it's truly a war zone. Well, there's a young lady by the left front tire of my bus, and she had the whole left side of her head blown off. Well, at that point, we didn't have a reunification plan. You know, we didn't have all that stuff. We had a security guy, and who was a longtime friend of Jason. He's a great guy. He's since passed away, not related to Vegas, but he was on stage, and he figured out. You know, everybody figured out quickly what was going on. Nobody knew where it was coming from. Jason thought a speaker had blown, because his ears, those are custom fit, molded, and that, you know, you can't really hear outside noise. So he's thinking a speaker's blown. Well, they get him to the side, and our guy lays on top of him. And then as I'm looking at this girl, I have 76 people there on our staff. So with no reunification plan, this is a blonde-headed lady, young lady, and I get down on my knees, and I don't know if she's going to make it, but I realize quickly it's not one of my staff. Not to sound cold, but I'm like, okay, I got to get my people. And about that time, I saw two of the band guys jump off the stage, and Tully, our bass player, we know later he had taken a bullet in his bass. They actually got it back about a month later, and the bullet was still lodged in it. But he went down, and he's holding his arm. And he's hypochondriac anyway, but I love him. But I get to him, and I'm like, dude, what's wrong? And he's like, I think my arm's broke. Well, I just reached down and flipped it over, thinking, okay, I might have to put a tourniquet on it. And I'm not an EMT. I'm not trained. My friends are, you know, what you guys do. I pretty much hang out with law enforcement, and I'm certainly not trained for any of that, but just instinct was like, okay, if he's bleeding, I got to stop it. And he wasn't. So long story short, as I ran onto our people, I just started putting them on my bus, and I made 5 trips while he was still shooting. Ended up with 18 people on the bus, and one of those was a probably 5 or 6 month old baby. His name's Leo. His mother worked for Live Nation, the promoter, and we'd been helping her that afternoon with Leo. You know, baby, she's on the road, and he had been in our office and just playing, and so he slept through the whole thing, the whole night, thank goodness. But it's a crazy night. I had nightmares for a long time. I went to multiple bodies. You've been to shows, Jeff. We all wear black usually. So if one of our crew guys have to go on stage, we're not distracting from what's going on. So it's you guys signed up for that, and you were in that line of work, both on the fire department side. I'm sure you've had many action, car wrecks and things. And I wasn't prepared for the images of, a lot of the folks were shot. I mean, it's just some, it's images you never get rid of.
Yeah.
And consequently, I mean, and this wasn't my idea, but we were fortunate. We did go right back to work, and we brought a trauma counselor on tour, at, I think Vanderbilt or Music Cares had recommended it. And that counselor came out with us, and I pulled everybody together and said there is no shame in talking to someone. And I think it took me 9 months or so before I realized, yeah, I probably need to go visit with her a little bit myself. But my wife and I have strong faith, and she was surrounded by her friends. I was the thing, and I don't say this in a boastful way, but I am proud of this. Um, Kind of jumped into the daylight now. It's still crazy times, but as the SWAT team took Jason and I out last, so it's probably 3.5, 4 hours into the process, and they take us to a mobile command a couple blocks away. Well, they wanted to interview Jason, and I was like, Jason doesn't know anything. He's there's nothing he can add. He thinks the speaker was blown. But finally they said, okay, you can go. Well, go where? None of us had hotel rooms except for me and our bus drivers. So I asked a police officer to please take Jason and Brittany to the FBO. I had a plane sitting on the runway for Jason and the band that night. They were going home right after the show. And I was just going to stay in Vegas for 3 or 4 days with my wife, and then catch back up with the tour. And I'll never forget this. The hearses, or the vans, were driving down. Can't remember the name of the road, but I mean, just one right after another. And I was walking from that command center back to the buses. There were buses inside the compound, and then there were buses outside in the parking lot because we had so many. When I walked up on one of the crew buses, there's probably 15 guys sitting there. And one of our guys just burst into tears. He just had a baby. And I said, I'll be right back. He said, I got to get home. I said, I'll be right back. And I stepped off the bus and I called Jason. I said, dude, I got to get these guys home. I'm going to have to get some planes. And he said, do what you got to do. So I was blessed and found some help. And we had everybody in the air flying home back to Nashville by 1 o'clock Monday. And then I stayed till technically Wednesday night, I guess at midnight. So that's jumping around, but that's, the guys that do our tour security now, two of them are they're former military special forces guys, and they talk about it all. We talk about it a lot. It's like being in a war zone. Is what that was for everybody.
Yeah, that's incredible. One thing that stuck out, and I didn't catch this the first time we talked about this a few years ago, was in the firefight, you had your wife secure and safe. For a fact, and you even said, I thought the shooter was right outside my motorhome, and you still decided to exit and help multiple people, meaning I don't think a lot of us in public safety, we understand this and we get this. It's a warrior mentality. But in the civilian and private sector, it's extremely rare that a person in your role, in your position, in that environment, chooses to leave the safety and security with your spouse and go help others. So very, very impressive. So kudos to you. You probably saved lives that day. So I know Ken probably has some questions about a lot of the other aspects of it, but I just wanted to say that's admirable what you did, because a lot of people stay put, stay under, and they would just wait for hours, but you decided to
Right.
do something else. So good for you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing the story. I know, I suspect that the more times you tell it, the easier that story gets to tell, but I know it's still got to be a very difficult story to tell, and I appreciate you sharing the details.
Yeah.
It's got to be hard, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm curious, about, obviously, I would imagine everything is different about the way you approach an event like that today versus how you would have approached it, how you approached it that night. I would imagine
Yeah.
things are very different. I think what I'm most curious about is you talked about your ear mic and who you were talking to. I think you said you were talking to somebody in merch.
Yeah.
Who are you talking to now? How has your communications plan
Yeah.
changed
Yeah.
for you specifically and your team around an event like this? I'm curious how that has changed.
Yeah. So and the merch guy wasn't on radio. He just came on the bus. He's looking for a place to hide. The conversation I'm having is with my counterpart, who was the production manager. He was kind of on the other side, and it would be like, okay, I got Jeff, and then okay, I got Ken, and we're like, trying to in real time trying to find everybody. So the communication breakdown was massive. I had just traditional radios that go pretty much the footprint of the venue, not like you guys have that would reach across town or, so there's no, um, boosters and things like that. But nowadays we have better radio system that we use, a better platform. And honestly, we've tried a bunch of different things from Nextel, similar things that there's like 5 or 6 of us, the security guys, myself, and a couple of other senior leader, role people on our staff have. And then, our security guys, the one thing that really changed when I came back, I got home that technically Thursday morning at 2 a.m. Well, about noon that Thursday, Jason called me and he goes, "Hey man, we've been called to come and do Saturday Night Live. What do you think?" Well, I had just got home and I really hadn't seen anybody except my wife, and she's a train wreck as you would expect. And I'm like, "Look, man, I'm in. I'll go. I don't think we should make anybody go." So I learned a lot. He said, I'll call the band, you call the crew. And we ended up going and doing that show. And then that was, on that Friday and Saturday we taped. And then Jason and I flew back to Vegas, and he did hospital visits. And I met with the FBI for several hours. Um, but I immediately, when Jason said, he asked me, "What do you think about going back to work?" I said, I pulled from Reba's story, and I worked for Reba and her husband for about 10 years. And if you go back to the plane crash that happened with Reba in 91, she got criticized for going back to work so quickly. I can't remember if it was the Oscars or some award. She and a lot of people were like, how could you do that? Well, I grew up in West Texas too. And, if you get bucked off, you get back on, not minimizing the thing. I told Jason, I said, "Look, man, we got to get back at it because, time is, it's just, I just feel like we need to get back at it." And but I said, "I don't think we should make anybody." And so anyway, I probably didn't fully answer your question. We have definitely changed communication, but the one thing that came up, Jason's like, "Hey man, what do you need?" And I'm like, "You got to let me hire my guys, and I got to have somebody that can wake up and think like a bad guy all day long, because I'm dealing with guests and show and different things. I need somebody that can wake up all day long, and the accountants are going to have to understand it's a new world that we live in, and that's never been a big part of our show budgets and what we do on an annual basis. We've got to earmark a budget, and we've got to get guys in here that we're never, we can't stop everything, but what we do have is a robust plan. And it's delicate, honestly, with our guys. I mean, I would say I don't do active shooter trainings and things like that because there's not a lot of turnover with someone like Jason. He's 20 years into his career. A lot of guys have been there from the beginning. I've been there 11 or 12 years. And, it's delicate. And I'm definitely not a counselor. If I look at you and say, "Jeff, are you okay?" And you say, "Yes," I'm like, "Okay, you're okay." And in reality, you're probably not. And, I thought I understood PTSD and had a real soft spot for military guys and stuff prior to that. I have a much better understanding of it today. I've dealt with it myself. And um, so, but, I think the key is having the right people that can come to you. And, think of it for us, I'm waking up in a different city every day. I may be in Las Vegas tomorrow. I might be in Phoenix the next day. So that's a disadvantage for us. So, and just like in anything, there's guys you gel with and work with well, and then there's other agencies, whether state, local, or federal.
Mhm.
You don't always blend. I mean, one of the things that came up, we had an outdoor show in New Orleans. It was the only outdoor show after the Vegas show, and I was really concerned about it. It was right next to Mercedes Dome Stadium, buildings all around. Well, naturally, the FBI wouldn't tell me they were going to put a sniper team up. And, I get it. I'm a civilian. So I brought my own. And, I've probably gone to prison for that. So, but we put a bug out vehicle behind the soundboard. And the guy that actually is our tour security director, is a fifth group sniper. And it turned out the FBI brought in plenty of help and were super kind and super helpful. And they were worried about a copycat at that point, just as much as I was. But, I understood being a civilian, they weren't going to tell me. And, of course, I didn't tell them I brought my own guy in either. So we don't have to do that anymore. But that's, I probably overdid it to an extent the first 6 months to a year. um, we were, and look, politics aside, I mean, look, I grew up hunting, gun guy, but you got to be kind and respectful and treat people the right way. But I don't take it lightly that keeping our guys safe on the road. It's a big piece of my job. Just a month ago, we were in Nevada, same deal, same setup. We had buildings everywhere to this day. And Jason called me to the bus and he goes, "Hey, man, I don't love this." And I'm like, "We're good." And I'm like, sometimes, our security guys will come to me and I'll tell them, "Hey, if you get pushback, and we're not getting what we need, let me know. I've got a relatively deep Rolodex and we can, usually find someone that'll understand kind of what we've been through and work with us." And, unfortunately, we're not the only ones. I mean, you guys retired out of it, but you're on the front lines for many years. And y'all saw it daily. It's a crazy world we live in.
It is. Man, I tell you, you sharing your story is going to be very, very impactful, not just with our listeners, but other leaders in public safety. But one thing that I just wanted to thank you and Jason for is your ongoing, very vocal and very public support for active and retired military, first responders, police, and fire. It's extremely refreshing. And in the law enforcement culture, the summer of 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, that was a rough summer for the profession. We're still struggling for recruitment and retention of quality leadership, but having people like y'all
Yeah.
always supporting us, it means the world to us. So please tell Jason, thank you so much. It really means a
Yeah,
lot to us.
I absolutely will. I absolutely will.
All right, so
It's a,
you gave us a great conversation point. We want to respect your time, but I got a personal question. We always end it with a nice personal question, a little lighthearted thing. So you talked earlier before we started recording about empty nesting, and now this next chapter of your life. So, what is one of the top three things on your bucket list?
um, it's actually to, I guess, probably help my wife achieve some things on her bucket list. I've traveled, fortunately, the world. I've been, to Australia, Europe, and Brazil, and traveling is not that high on my list anymore. But my wife has some places, especially out west, and she stayed home and raised two boys, and it's interesting. I'd call when they were younger. My boys are 25 and 30 now, but I'd call home and got one in junior high and high school. I said, "How'd you like to speak to your son?" I'm like, "Put him on the phone." So, let me talk to him. But, my wife is the rock of our family, and no question. So my bucket list would be to take her to some of these places that she wants to see, out west, um and then for me, just spending time. My youngest son is on staff at Auburn for the football team. They're having a tough year. He's in operations, which is similar to what I do on the road, but on the football side. And so I try to get to see him. I was just at the Kentucky game last weekend, and then I go to Fort Worth quite a bit and see my older son. So, it's crazy. I've traveled so much and millions of miles between buses and planes. I just want to take time and enjoy family and friends. And I guess I'm at that phase in life where, yeah, making sure the people I love know it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Well, I'll tell you, that's probably, I think, the best answer I've heard. I've asked multiple times, but it also speaks volumes of why you're still happy at 33 to 35 years in a relationship. So kudos to you. I have a
yeah,
similar path. So remember, you always got a friend in Vegas. Next time you get out there, Jake, let me know.
thank you, brother.
But any closing comments, Ken?
No, thank you for spending the time with us. And I would just a shout out to our brides who are the rock of all of our houses, and make sure that we
Ain't
have
that
a
the
house to
truth?
come home to, and we
Yeah.
love them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you for
Absolutely.
that.
All right.
Ken, I
Safe
just wanted,
travels, my friend.
yeah. Can I just say one thing to Ken
Yeah,
real
you
quick?
bet.
I just, there were a lot, and I didn't know who they were at the time in the chaos, but there were a lot of off-duty firemen in the audience that night. And
Yeah.
I'm not calling them out any more than the law enforcement and EMTs, but I saw a lot of guys rip their shirts off, and I'm sure you've heard those stories and stuff, but hats off to those guys. And it was an amazing, there's always something good in things like this that come from it. And I saw a lot of heroic things that night that in real time, I wasn't processing, but after the fact, I was able to realize. So I just wanted to say that, how impactful that was to, as time goes by and reflecting on that. So anyway, thank you guys for having me, and I appreciate it. Hope to do it again sometime.
Okay, my friend. Take
Thank you,
care,
sir.
Jake. Safe travels to you.
Thank you guys.
Okay.